Welcome, everyone, to the Sunday Morning Marxist Forum. This session is being recorded and will be posted on YouTube with the link on our website, which is icssmarx.org. Within the next few days, ICSS stands for the Institute for the Critical Study of Society. For almost 20 years, our sessions were held at the Marxist Library in Oakland, California. Now we host our sessions on Zoom, and I should say good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, as we have speakers and attendees from around the United States and throughout the world. My name is Sharon, and I'm today's moderator. I'm a member of the ICSS Program Committee that organizes this forum. Our committee always welcomes input, feedback, and suggestions for topics and speakers, and you can contact us through our website, again, icssmarx.org. This is a comradely forum for political discourse and debate. As such, we ask that you show respect for our participants and the moderator of today's session. Please note that the opinions expressed are those of the speaker and participants. They do not necessarily represent those of ICSS. However, we are united in our respect for the work of Karl Marx, and we believe that his work remains relevant today. Our motto is taken from Marx's 7 Theses on Feuerbach. The philosophers have interpreted the world in various ways. The point, however, is to change it. Our program today is entitled Narco-State Myth Used to Attack Venezuela. For humanity, Venezuela's Bolivarian Revolution represents hope. For the United States imperial project, which seeks to crush any alternative to its order, it is a threat. Washington projects its drug problem onto Venezuela and the rest of Latin America. U.S. policy under Trump, which confounds terrorism with criminal activity, is a cover for projecting military domination. Claiming the prerogative to unilaterally intervene in the sovereign territories of neighboring states to fight cartels or murdering a boat's crew in the Caribbean are not solutions. Latin American leaders are turning the spotlight back on Washington. They point to U.S. gun policies, consumer demand, and ulterior motives behind Washington's renewed, quote, war on drugs, unquote, such as the current regime change offensive against Venezuela. The drug problem won't be solved by scapegoating Latin America when the U.S. has yet to address root causes at home. Our speaker, Roger Harris, taught political science at a historically black college in Mississippi in the late 1960s and was involved in the civil rights movement and community organizing in East Harlem, New York City. Roger is on the state central committee of the California Peace and Freedom Party and on the board of the human rights organization, the Task Force on the Americas. He is on the program committee of the Marxist Forum and on the secretariat of the U.S. Peace Council. He is active in the Sanctions Kill campaign and the Nicaragua Solidarity Coalition. He is a founding member of the Venezuela Solidarity Network and was an election accompanier for the July 28th presidential election in Venezuela. His political writings may be regularly found in Counterpunch, LA Progressive, Antiwar.com, and the Orinoco Tribune. Roger, welcome. Please begin.
Thank you, Sharon. This is a very current topic, perhaps too current. I mean, there's U.S. warships right off the coast of Venezuela right now. When I woke up this morning, the first thing I did was go on my web browser and see, have they attacked? Have they attacked yet? So this is a very, very relevant and pertinent topic for us to be discussing today. But let me begin with a little autobiographical background, because This is about how the United States is using drugs to project its imperial dominance. And this autobiographical stuff goes back to way back into the late 1960s when I was working as a community organizer in Spanish Harlem. And East Harlem is also what it's called back then. And one day I came down from my tenement house where I lived. I looked down the block and I saw this big, shiny, new Cadillac limousine. Now, in that neighborhood, most people didn't even own cars, let alone a new car. And this car had Jersey plates, New Jersey plates. So I asked some of the street kids that I knew pretty well, and I said, "Hey, what's that? What's this about?" And what they said was very nonchalantly, like, "Isn't it obvious? It's the mafia, and they're coming to collect their drug money." Later on that season, I found a place a little bit further east from where I was living near the East River. It was a playground, and at night it was lit up, and it was filled with people. It was like a drug flea market open. And I wondered, how could a blanquito like myself from the suburbs and some third graders expose the drug trade in New York City when the authorities, who were plastering signs about keeping New York City free of drugs, seem to be able to not be able to deal with this thing that's just open in the open. So I was wondering about that in the 1960s, and quite frankly, I've been wondering about that ever since. One thing is clear, that the United States is the world's largest consumer of illicit drugs, and it has pitted itself against a country, Venezuela, which has the largest oil reserves in the world. The drug issue is being projected by the imperialists onto Latin America. In fact, as I will argue in this talk, the drug plague has a made in the USA stamp on it. For instance, White House spokesperson Anna Kelly just recently had a press conference and she warned of, quote, evil narco terrorists. I'm not making this up. That's her words. Evil narco terrorists are trying to poison our homeland. Drug interdiction has been weaponized by the Trump administration as an excuse to impose imperial domination, and most notably right now on Venezuela. The attacks on Venezuela started from the very beginning when Hugo Chavez was elected president of Venezuela in 1998 and initiated the Bolivarian Revolution. And ever since, the United States has sought to crush that revolution. That revolution energized a pink tide in Latin America. The pink tide was the election of left-leaning governments that were a blowback against the failures of neoliberalism to meet people's needs. It also galvanized a counter-hegemonic wave internationally. No one recognizes the significance of the international role that Venezuela plays more than the imperialists themselves, who have mobilized the full force of the empire against it. Ben Norton, some of you might be familiar with him. He's a blogger. He's located right now in China, used to be in in Nicaragua. And he called Venezuela the poster child of everything the U.S. empire fears. First of all, the Bolivarian Revolution is a revolutionary project that seeks sovereign control over its natural resources. The oil underneath the soil of Venezuela, the Bolivarian Revolution belongs to the Venezuelans. And they've kicked out foreign companies that were and nationalized their oil. That was done actually before Chavez's time. Two, Venezuela has been a key voice in Latin American regional integration. There is nothing that the imperialists fear more than integration, the unity of people against imperialism. And an extension of that, three, Venezuela has tried to integrate Latin America with Asia and Africa as part of a much larger Global South project. what we call multilateralism. And finally, fourth, Venezuela has fostered strong relations with China, Russia, and Iran. So the United States has been on the case of Venezuela from the very beginning. In 2015, then President Barack Obama accused Venezuela of being, quote, an extraordinary threat. That's a direct quote, an extraordinary threat to U.S. national security. In fact, of course, as we all understand, the opposite of the case. The U.S. is threatening Venezuela. Venezuela is not threatening the United States. Obama imposed unilateral coercive measures. They're euphemistically called sanctions. Unilateral coercive measures are illegal under international law, for, among other things, they constitute collective punishment. And that's because they deliberately target the population. Some of you might be familiar with Alfred Maurice de Zayas. He was a U.S. Special Rapporteur for Human Rights. And the Zayas reported that over 100,000 excess deaths have been caused by sanctions against Venezuela. And some of you may have seen this recent study that was published in The Lancet, one of the world's most prestigious medical journals, which found that unilateral sanctions imposed by the U.S. and or by the European Union have caused an average of over 500,000 deaths a year. To put that in perspective, that many deaths are more people than die, even right now with the genocide in Palestine. More people die from unilateral coercive measures than they do from armed conflicts. That's a fact that The Lancet published. And of those people that were dying, disproportionately, most of them are children under 5 years old. So sanctions should be understood as deadly as bombs. They are not a substitute for war. They are actually a continuation of war by hybrid means. And this is very important for our understanding of what's happening in Venezuela, as well as other countries that are under sanctions. We must understand that these countries are countries that are, in effect, in the midst of war, a war of aggression. And it's a war of aggression which is completely one-sided. So that really is a key understanding of what we want to understand about Venezuela, is that this is a society which is in the midst of war. Each subsequent Yankee administration has renewed and to varying degrees intensified Obama's sanctions, and this has been a bipartisan effort. The imperial objective of regime change in Venezuela, however, has been thwarted. And it's been thwarted by three factors. One is the stalwart political leadership of Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro. Could not be done at all, but for the second factor, which is in concert with the Venezuelan people. And third, this is in firm alliance with their military. And so Venezuela is a country where the military completely supports the civilian leadership. That's also the case in Nicaragua and Cuba. But it's not the case in many other countries, such as Colombia and Brazil. So their actions should be understood in relationship to the fact that not only do they have the imperialists against them externally, but in some of those countries, they don't have the military supporting them as well. But back to Venezuela. The U.S. has aligned itself with the extreme right-wing opposition in Venezuela. Not with the mainstream right-wing, but the real fringe right-wing. But today, that right-wing opposition has become completely discredited and factionalized. So in effect, even though the sanctions have been draconian, they have failed from the point of view of the imperialists to achieve regime change. And in this context, President Trump dispatched an armada of warships, F-39 stealth aircraft, and thousands of troops to increase the pressure on Venezuela. Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro responded. He said, quote, "What Washington wants is to control Venezuela's wealth." He added that the U.S. military deployment is imperial aggression under the pretext of fighting drug trafficking. Maduro correctly maintains that his country is actually free of drug production and processing. Cocaine is not produced there or manufactured there. Neither is marijuana and other drugs, other illicit drugs that the U.S. is concerned about. Certainly not fentanyl. And Maduro's claim that his country is drug free or largely drug free is well documented. It's documented by reports from the United Nations, from the European Union, and even from the U.S.'s own drug enforcement agency, the DEA. The Venezuelan president could also have referenced the findings of Trump's own security agencies, which showed that, contrary to Trump's accusation that Maduro was the head of a cartel, a criminal cartel called the Tren de Agua, the TDA criminal gang, his own security agencies say that that's not the case. And speaking of collusion with drug cartels, Maduro could have commented on the DEA itself. Incidentally, it was expelled from Venezuela in 2005 for espionage. So the DEA acted not so much in Venezuela to stop drugs, but to spy on the Venezuelans. According to an Associated Press report, a strongly pro-imperialist outlet, the DEA has continued to secretly build drug trafficking cases against Venezuela, and this is in violation of international law. Maduro's vice president, the Venezuelan vice president, Delcy Rodriguez, highlights that the DEA's, quote, has known connections to the drug trafficking world. And we can again go to U.S. sources to verify that. The U.S. Department of Justice revealed that at least 10 DEA agents in the neighboring Colombia participated in what they called sex parties with prostitutes paid by the local drug cartels. And as recently as 2022, the DEA quietly removed its Mexico chief for maintaining improper contacts with cartels. All this underscores a troubling pattern. The pattern that we see with the participation and action of the DEA is that the DEA presence tends to coincide with major drug activity. That doesn't coincide with major actions to get rid of drugs activity. So we find that where the DEA is, we actually have more drug trafficking rather than less. That raises some pretty interesting questions. But President Maduro also reminded the Yankees that the U.S. is not interested in addressing the serious drug health problem its own citizens face due to high drug use. And Maduro pointed out that the drug trafficking profits, all these drugs that are flooding the U.S. that Trump talks about, the profits from those drugs mainly remain within the U.S. banking system. In fact, illicit narcotics is a major U.S. industry. And this is based on research of a number of different sources, including unimpeachable imperialist sources such as the Rand Corporation, which is largely funded by the U.S. Army. And it found out that narcotics rank alongside pharmaceuticals and oil and gas as top U.S. commodities. So I'm not making this up. This is from the U.S. NGOs that support imperialism. The former head of the UN Office of Drugs and Crime, a man by the name of Pino Arlachi, commented that he had been in Venezuela, he had been in Colombia, Bolivia, Peru, Brazil, but he never had to go to Venezuela because there was simply no need to deal with the drug issue there. He noted that the Venezuelans' cooperation in the fight against drug trafficking was one of the best in South America, and he compared it to the Cubans' impeccable record. He called Trump's accusations a delusional narrative. and he described it as a geopolitically motivated slander. The 2005, the most recent World Drug Report from the UN, tells a story completely opposite of what the Trump administration is putting forward today. According to Alachi, if any Latin American country should be targeted, it is Ecuador. Ecuador, it's a strong ally of the United States, and it is the world's leading cocaine exporter. Everybody agrees on that. The major source of the exportation of cocaine internationally is coming from Ecuador. How is it exported? It's exported on banana boats. Ecuador is a major producer and exporter of bananas. What is very interesting is who owns those boats. It's owned by the Noboa family, and the president of Ecuador is one Daniel Noboa. In fact, it is his family's boats that are exporting cocaine to the United States and Europe and other areas. So, U.S. is the largest consumer of illegal drugs in the world, is the major supplier of weapons to cartels, drug cartels in the world, and is also the major producer of drug precursor chemicals used to produce drugs for the cartels. It is also the world's largest money launderer for drugs. And prominent U.S. banks in the U.S. court system have been caught laundering drug money. And these include HSBC Bank USA, Wachovia, Wells Fargo, and the Bank of America. So we constantly hear about Latin American drug kingpins, but we never hear who distributes the dope when it crosses the border. That question of who distributes the narcotics in the United States is left completely unanswered and not even questioned. That is not even questioned by the U.S. Press, the corporate press, or its government. But research by the Mexican journalist Jorge Esquivel demonstrated that no U.S. administration has ever seriously investigated domestic drug trafficking networks. Think about that. We have all this talk about the drug plague, but has there ever been an investigation of domestic drug trafficking networks? And that's a very important point. A Venezuelan international analyst, Sergio Gelfenstein, asserts that Washington, quote, has no interest whatsoever in combating the drug trade. Gelfenstein argues that the drug trade in the United States is just too big and too profitable. Besides, drug usage serves to pacify potentially dissident demographics, such as the youth and African American communities. In Mexico, Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum notes that if there's any alliance that exists with the cartels, it lies with the U.S. gun shops. The U.S. gun shops that are giving weapons or selling weapons to the drug cartels. And she urges Washington to look inward at its own drug demand and lax enforcement. So the resounding message from Latin America is that blaming them alone for the drug problem is misleading. It is a cover for projecting military domination. The drug problem won't be solved by scapegoating Latin America when the U.S. has yet to address the root causes at home. So let's speak a little bit, and of course, I would like to get into this much more in the Q&A about what's happening at home. Because what's happening at home with the use of military force against our own people and the use of military force abroad by the United States, those two are definitely linked. What's happening is that the guardrails are down for imperialist aggression. The Democrats may carp about the optics of Trump's actions, but they have been bipartisan partners in opposition to the Bolivarian Revolution's attempt to build socialism in the 21st century. And for instance, every single U.S. senator voted to confirm Marco Rubio as Trump's Secretary of State. There wasn't any dissension. The Democrats fell over each other in making Rubio the Secretary of State. Of course, now they aren't comfortable with Rubio, but Rubio was a known quantity. They could have voted against him when they knew what he would be up to. But in fact, what he's up to, despite the eyewash, is regime change in Venezuela and projection of U.S. imperialism elsewhere, which they support in a bipartisan effort. And that also goes to what we call the so-called international community and its institutions such as the United Nations. They have been powerless to stop the U.S. Zionist war in Palestine. And this is, we're living in what we might call a post-Gaza genocidal world where the guardrails are really down against imperialism, the internal guardrails. U.S. aggression on Venezuela is clearly escalating. It's gone from funding of opposition elements, lawfare, sanctions, plus occasional coup attempts and sabotage. And now Venezuela is threatened with direct military confrontation. As we all know, a U.S. fleet, a war fleet, is off the coast of Venezuela as we speak right now. And what might be possible is that they might actually attempt to decapitate the leadership of the Venezuelan Bolivarian Revolution. We've seen that with U.S. and the Zionists in partnership with such attempts at decapitation of leadership has been done against Iran, against Hamas, against Hezbollah, most recently the attack of the Israelis on Hamas delegation. So all those things are possible and could happen. So to conclude, and I would like to get into all these things much more in the Q&A, Venezuela truly is humanity's hope. But for the U.S. imperial project, it is a threat, and it's one of the primary threats that the U.S. has recognized. Resistance by Venezuela has stiffened to meet the challenge. The civilian-military unity has remained strong. Millions of civilian reservists have enlisted in the militia, the national militia, which is now a branch of the Venezuelan armed forces, and regular troops have been dispatched to the Colombian border. And so I would like to conclude this part of the presentation with a very short video clip. This is a video clip that shows fishermen, artisanal fishermen, I guess more correctly fishers, but we're not really familiar with that less gendered expression. But these are people that make their living. These are people that make a subsistence living fishing off the coast of Venezuela. And they are accompanying one of the Venezuelan military ships out to sea to defend the country. And it just shows you the unity of the people with their own military. It's a beautiful video, and I would ask Alan to show that now. Thank you.
La cuerda tensa, tiran y tiran, la casa no está en venta, se me retiran, se te retiran, el alquitrán hirviendo en el asfalto en que desfilan, esas familias que son ejemplo, que cuidan a la patria como un templo y se desploman esos intentos, ya no hay colonia, el perfume huele a gloria y la carroña en su lamento no puede y agradezco cada sacrificio de cada compatriota que no cede ante el desquicio del que quiere tragarse hasta el último resquicio de riqueza y que ambiciona lo que está bajo del piso. Qué mal que hizo los cálculos el pato Donald, qué feo es verlo como desentona en zonas que cree conocer acostumbrado al monopolio, no entiende que haya gente que no se vende al demonio, que Venezuela tiene el más preciado patrimonio, más pelotas que coltán y más ovarios que petróleo. La cuerda tensa, tiran y tiran, la casa no está en venta, se me retiran.
So thank you very much, and I'll be looking forward to the Q&A.
Thank you so much, Roger. we're going to have almost an hour for discussion. Before we go into discussion, the planning committee would like to share what we're going to be doing in the next couple of weeks, but can someone else from the planning committee please jump on and speak about that? I don't have it in front of me. Here. We got some good programs coming up. I just don't have it in my mind. Roger, do you have that?
Okay, no, I'm not in the position to do that. So perhaps during the Q&A, you could look that up and then at the end inform us on it.
All right.
So let's open the Q&A and perhaps explain our rules of engagement.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. We'll come back to announcements. So please raise your hand by going to the React button at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and I will try to take people in the order in which you do that. Sometimes it gets a little fuzzy on the Zoom, but I'll try. And we will ask people to limit your comment and/or question to 2 minutes and only ask one question. We can come back to you, perhaps, depending on how the discussion goes. So I see a couple of hands already. I'll call on Lucy and then Judith. Go ahead, Lucy.
Yeah, Harry, thank you. Roger, thank you so much for the exposition of the very good, very well developed, and very informative. But I had heard something that the oil in Venezuela constitutes one of the largest reserves in the world. And also that it is very key in terms of development that is needed in the global south, in the countries that are poor. That oil, unfortunately, even at this time, is extremely needed in the process. In fact, it is the primary need of the third world to develop. They need oil. And that may be one reason why the U.S. focuses so much attention on Venezuela. I don't know. What do you think?
Right. I think that's part of the equation. Now, sometimes people say it's the oil stupid. And that has a certain amount of truth to it. Venezuela does have the largest oil reserves in the world. It has a lot of mineral wealth. It has the fourth largest natural gas reserves. It also has major reserves in gold and a number of other precious metals. So all those are strategic resources that the imperialists want to have control over. Mm-hmm. So that's very important. But we also have to understand that it's control of strategic resources and not just simply the economic factor that's incentivizing the imperialists. The imperialists want to have world domination, and part of that is controlling strategic resources.
Thank you. Judith is next, followed by Richard Wright and Jean. Go ahead, Judith. Please unmute. Judith, can you unmute? Go ahead. Now you're muted again. Why don't we?
Okay, got it.
Okay, go ahead.
All right,
please.
yeah, okay. I just wanted to ask this question. Pete Hegseth is calling all the generals, the top generals and top admirals in the world of America, to Washington for a conference. I think it's about 800 people, and it sounds very serious. So I was wondering if you had any idea if this had anything to do with the possible invasion of Venezuela, or or if not, what you thought it might be. Okay.
Yeah, there's been a tremendous amount of ink spilled on this issue of what's happening and what's happening behind the scenes. Of course, nobody knows what's happening. I mean, other than the broader picture that the imperialists want to extend their domination and they want to overthrow the regime in Venezuela. I use the word regime really the way they use it. We would call it, the government. But there is a lot of movement around there, and we know about this through the press. And so I think it's valuable to understand the role that the corporate press plays in this, because the corporate press are truly stenographers for the imperialists. The New York Times a few weeks ago came out with a breaking article. It was a leak that they had, that Trump had signed a memorandum, secret, but leaked nonetheless to the New York Times, that would authorize the use of U.S. military force against drug cartels in foreign countries. Now, this is pure stenography. This is Venezuela. This is the New York Times doing the work of the press secretary for the Pentagon. So the press has just been fomenting all these rumors and making sort of egging on the situation. Just very recently, there was an NBC report that said, quote, U.S. is preparing options for military strikes on drug targets against Venezuela, inside Venezuela. And that's been picked up all over the corporate press. It's been repeated and repeated. In a way, it's manufactured news. What the NBC did is that they had this live feed from the White House. And so they had this guy standing in front of the White House with a microphone saying, there's rumors. But there's been rumors for a long time. I mean, I could have gone in front of the White House, or any one of you, and had a live feed from the White House if you were standing in front of there on the street. And then he said, this is interesting. So I'll just read this because it says, it speaks to this point. It says, U.S. military officials are drawing up options to target drug traffickers inside Venezuela, and strikes within that country's borders could potentially begin in a matter of weeks. And then they quote 4 sources. Now, these sources are typically not mention who they are or even who they're associated with. We don't know if it's the guy's brother-in-law. He says 2 of the sources are familiar with what's being discussed, and then the other 2 sources are one step even removed. They're familiar with the discussions of the others that were familiar. So there is a tremendous amount of rumor mongering. But so that's not to say that the threat isn't real. It's that the press is manipulating this, and we don't know really what's happening in the immediate point. What is clear is that the Venezuelan unity has been very strong. The President Maduro has called for people to enlist in the Bolivarian militia, and some millions of people have enlisted in the militia. As you saw with that video, there's strong grassroots support for their military, and things have remained unified. The Venezuelans have not cracked under this pressure.
Okay, I got a nice stack here. I'm going to call on Richard, followed by Jean, Citizen, and Riva. Go ahead, Richard.
Yeah, thank you, Roger, for your presentation. And for what it's worth, I posted the link to the counterpunch version of your article way back when. The issue to me is this: is that this is the latest example of lies. I mean, in point of fact, the United States really, in Afghanistan, in Vietnam, in Panama, they only used the drug rationale to further their own agenda. So I guess I'm kind of questioning, in Grenada, in Cuba, and in Panama, and it just goes on and on. And how do we get beyond the New York Times narrative of how do we get beyond the New York Times narrative? How do we get to the people out there and make them aware that, well, I'm sure they're aware, but what do we do on this? Any thoughts? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So just to break down some of those points that you make on the New York Times narrative, of course, we should look at alternative sources. Very good sources would be the Orinoco Tribune, Venezuela Analysis, and also Telesur. There were many other U.S. sources that are excellent on that. I think the example that you brought up of Afghanistan is particularly telling because it gives you the notion of what it means for a country to be under the beneficence, and I do that with air quotes, the beneficence of the imperialists. The United States was in Afghanistan for nearly 20 years, and the end product of that was that Afghanistan was in much worse shape than when the United States entered. And this is the imperialists are no longer have the ability to impose puppet regimes. So what they do is they try to ruin the country. We saw that in Haiti right now, where they're trying to militarize the whole country. We saw that in Libya, and we saw that in Syria, and we saw that in Afghanistan. And that is really the threat for Venezuela. As for what we can do about it, I'm not going to pretend that I'm Lenin, but I would very much encourage other people in this Q&A to suggest what they think can be done.
You don't have to be Lenin to have suggestions of what is to be done. Jean, followed by Citizen. Please unmute, Jean.
I'm unmuted. Okay. Well, thanks. This is a great talk, and there's so much there. I, kind of overawed by your whole talk. But there are two things. First of all, as a member of the program committee, I did look over our notes. And October 5th, we have Charlotte Cates, who spoke before, giving a realistic assessment of Palestine 2 years after Al-Qusayr flood, countering imperialist Zionist propaganda. So looking forward to that. And then October 12th, the role of China and Russia in the anti-imperialist struggle. And our speaker will be Sarah Flounders, who's a member of Veterans for Peace and many other things. Very knowledgeable woman. So those are some great programs coming up.
Thank you, Jean.
And the other thing that I wanted to say, just on my own listening to the talk, the name of Epstein came up, Jeffrey Epstein, who has his hands in almost every unsavory aspect of U.S. foreign policy. He owns a couple of islands, or he did own a couple of islands in the Caribbean. And I'm just wondering, is there a connection, or what is the connection there? Because he has his fingers in everything, as does Trump. Thank you.
Yeah, the Epstein thing, there's been a lot of speculation about that, of course, that, and I'm sure everybody is probably familiar with whether he, in fact, we know that he's not with us anymore, but whether it was voluntary suicide or whether it was he was killed is a question. And certainly this pressure on Trump, as well as many other prominent figures, including Bill Clinton, in their relationship to Epstein. So it's one of those things where there's speculation that some of the actions that Trump are making right now are a diversion from the Epstein scandal, much like Clinton in his administration when he had the Monica Lewinsky scandal, bombed, I believe it was Sudan. Someone should correct me if I'm got that country wrong, but he was suggested that it was a diversionary thing. And I'd be interested in hearing what other people's opinions are on that.
Thank you.
Hey, next is Citizen, followed by Riva and Laura and David. Go ahead, Citizen.
Yes, thank you for the talk. It's very interesting. I just wanted to comment, from what I can tell, it seems like the so-called progressive Democrats in Congress have been quiet about this situation regarding Venezuela. And I certainly wonder why they continue to be quiet on Venezuela. But my question is, and I think I must have misheard, but I thought I heard something about the West or the UN, I'm not sure who you referred to, can't stop the genocide in Gaza. And so I was wondering, one, if I misheard that, and two, if I didn't, in what context you meant that the West and or the US, and or the UN can't stop the genocide in Congress. It seems like those countries certainly can just by putting sanctions on Israel. And, I find it interesting in that context, excuse this tangent, that many countries of the West can declare that they recognize a Palestinian state, a purely performative thing, but they're not moving to stop the genocide. And I wonder, incidentally, not a question for you, Roger, but, where are the borders of this so-called Palestinian state that they're recognizing? But anyway, my question was about, I may have misheard what you meant when you said that whoever can't stop the genocide in Gaza. And if you want, you can comment on these progressive Democrats not saying anything in Congress. Thank you.
Yes. So in terms of progressive Democrats, there has been a bill proposed to limit Trump's war powers, specifically against Venezuela. We'll see where that goes. Though I think that that my own opinion of that the Democrats wish to get rid of the Bolivarian Revolution. They're just uncomfortable about the optics of what Trump is doing. But welcome other thoughts on that as well. In terms of the genocide in Palestine, I did not suggest that the international community could not. I just was pointing out the overwhelming fact that we see and hear every day is that they have not. And that is the most burning anti-imperialist issue of our time right now.
Thank you.
Okay, Riva, followed by Laura or David, or David. Go ahead, Riva.
Hi, Roger, you were great. I knew you would be. So one is, Colombia is a good example of how I describe U.S. foreign policy, which is, what is our oil doing under your land? All right, that's number one. I'm not going to take a lot of time. Two, can you send us the link to that video? Because it was really uplifting, the fishing boats. We really need to get that out. So my question is going to be, one is, I keep reminding myself that Trump's first term, he went after Venezuela. But my question for you is, didn't Colombia just come out and support of Venezuela and sovereignty and the safety of the Caribbean? And has Colombia ever supported the Bolivarian Revolution before? And hopefully that's a significant move. If you could talk about sort of the gathering of Central America countries in support of Venezuela, it would be great. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. And are you talking from Jamaica? And this is not Jamaica, Queens?
I am. In fact, I flew over, actually coming home 2 weeks ago, and I saw the U.S. naval ship right outside Panama City. It's like, oh, it's a big ship.
Okay, so I'll ask Alan, who's doing the backup, and is on the program committee, if he could put up that video link, I would appreciate it. I have trouble single tasking, let alone double tasking. So, Colombia is a very significant development. Colombia was the U.S.'s strongest ally in Latin America up until the election of Petro. And this was a sea change in the entire strategic alignment of Latin America with Petro's election. He is the first leftist to run and win in the entire history of Colombia. This was very important. Other leftists tried to run for the presidency, but were assassinated. And during Petro's campaign, he survived some assassination attempts, which have continued into his presidency. Colombia is a global partner of NATO. It's the only global partner, I believe, officially of NATO in the Western Hemisphere. And Colombia was sort of a former Colombian president put it very well. He said, we were accused of being the Israel of Latin America in relationship to the role that Israel plays as a projection of U.S. imperialism in West Asia. He said, we're accused of that. And I am proud to say we are the Israel of Latin America. So with the election of Petro, Venezuela benefited tremendously because at least there weren't U.S. initiated coup attempts through Colombia with the common border that were in concert with the Colombian government. Most recently, and this was just 2 days ago, Petro was at the UN General Assembly, and he spoke out incredibly well. He spoke out and said in support of the Palestinian causes, and he even said that he asked the militaries of the United States and the militaries of Israel to disobey orders and to stop the genocide themselves. Then he went on the street corner outside the United Nations in Donald Trump's hometown, wearing a keffiyeh and leading a pro-Palestinian chant. And if anybody has a video of that, please post that because it's really beautiful. I mean, this guy has cojones, and for many of the Venezuelans, they were kind of suspicious of Petro at first, but right now he is being one of the leading voices against the U.S. Zionist genocide in Palestine. By the way, he is termed out in Colombia. You can only be a president for one term, and there'll be a big fight to see who wins the next term in Colombia.
Thank you. Next, Laura.
Yeah. Thank you, Roger, for packing so much information into 30 minutes. It was astounding. I have a couple of comments. One is, you mentioned the media. Also, inside Venezuela, the media has been against both Hugo Chavez and Nicolas Maduro for these past 25 years. And it was interesting. I was there one time and I wanted to get a picture of the newspaper, a photograph of the newspaper to show how the freedom of the press is not suppressed in Venezuela. And I saw a couple of newspapers on the same day saying dictador, dictator, calling Hugo Chavez a dictator on their version of the New York Times and the Washington Post. The hopeful thing, actually, is that the major media has been against Chavez and Maduro all these 25 years, and they have still won. So, and the oil, a comment on the oil is that I was surprised to realize that oil was nationalized in the 70s in Venezuela, 20 years or more before Hugo Chavez was elected president. And the U.S. corporations were given a deal by Chavez, but it was that Venezuela would own at least 50%. And most of the oil companies took the deal because they could still make a profit, but not a killing. But Exxon was screaming bloody murder because of how terrible, Chavez was. But the main thing, and I'll end with this, is that it's oil. The main relationship, I think, to oil is that oil gave Hugo Chavez the wealth to provide a movement towards socialism in his country. And it's the socialism. And Hugo Chavez did regional integration. He knew that no country could stand alone against the powers of the United States. And so the regional integration, Chavez died 12 years ago. Those regional integration points still are helping Latin America. So it was socialism and solidarity more than oil is the reason that the United States is targeting with warships Venezuela at this point, and that's the way I see it. Thank you again, Roger, for such a wonderful summary.
Thank you, Laura. And I think if I remember correctly, we first met on a task force on the Americas delegation to Venezuela, and something like 2008 or something like that.
2006, the World Social Forum, when it was in Caracas, Venezuela.
Yeah. Well, thank you for your comments. I completely agree with you, because the oil also gives the Venezuela the strength to resist, and that's very important as well. So those are all very good points.
Thank you. I'm going to call on myself, followed by Raj, Norma, Paulina. So I have a question, but first I'd like to make a comment. The question of what can we do? We have to be everywhere, in my opinion, educating people about the lies they're being told and what is really the truth. So, for example, Indivisible is calling for another No Kings march all over the country. I'm sure they will get plenty of people out. They did last time in all kinds of places, big and small. And we know that Indivisible is pretty much the Democratic Party. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't be there. There should be anti-imperialist signs and slogans, and if possible, speakers everywhere that we can possibly be. And we should never forget that it's up to us, really. Us, I mean the Marxist left in general, to raise the consciousness of people about U.S. imperialism and why it hurts people at home as well as in every country around the world. And I think we should discuss more about where other opportunities might be to do that educational thing. And my question, Roger, is what in relation to the economics position of Venezuela and the sanctions and everything that is hurting the country, where are they with relation to BRICS?
Yeah, that's a kind of a touchy question, Sharon, but I'll try to answer it the best of my ability. So BRICS is an acronym. It means Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. It's a trade association from those founding members. There are now about 15 official members of BRICS and some associated members. Venezuela very much wanted to be a member of BRICS. It is an alliance of the global South. And the Venezuelan membership, along with the membership of Nicaragua, was vetoed by Brazil. And so we don't have that level of unity that would be desired for the global South. And that just shows you that even though the U.S. hegemony is being challenged in many, many fronts, it is still quite strong and has the ability to make people like the president of Brazil, Lula, reluctant to admit Venezuela and Nicaragua to BRICS when it is in his objective interest to do so, because Latin American and Global South unity is key to resisting imperialism, as Mr. Lula is finding out quite strongly right now with 50% tariffs on many of the Brazilian goods. So that is an ongoing struggle for unity. The ALBA, ALBA, it means the Alliance of the Bolivarian Alliance of our peoples of America, something like that, which was founded by Venezuela and Cuba under Chavez and Fidel Castro. And it now includes about a dozen countries. They have very strongly supported Venezuela. And on this particular issue of the U.S. military incursion, there is very strong Latin American and Caribbean support of that. That said, there are certain countries which are very closely aligned with the United States, Trinidad and Tobago being in particular, and El Salvador being another example, and also Ecuador and Peru and Argentina. Those are all, and Paraguay, excuse me, are the main right-wing countries. They have been cheering on the U.S. military incursion.
Thank you. I'm going to call on Raj, followed by Norma, and then Paulina. Raj, go ahead, please.
Hi, Roger. Thank you for a very informative talk. I have seen somewhere in the media world that China and Russia both are stepping up in defense of Venezuela. So I'd like to know if you have come across that. And given that United States does not want, I mean, it wants to dominate the whole world, but on Latin America, it has a specific law that, or a specific position that no outside power can have any kind of base there. So, and Venezuela, has tremendous oil wealth. So, given all this, I would like to know from you, and Trump is kind of buffeted between his MAGA base, which doesn't want him to start a war, and US imperialism that cannot but act to dominate. How do you see this equation, or do you know anything about China and Russia stepping up their defense of Venezuela?
Yes. Thank you for raising that, Raj, because that's a very critical part of the equation. And it's part of a global movement toward a multilateral world and a unity of the South against the imperialist West, or not so much against, but to defend themselves against the imperialist West. China and Russia, and we should also add Iran, have been critical to the survival of Venezuela. The U.S. unilateral coercive measures, the so-called sanctions, brought Venezuela to its knees. It caused the largest peacetime contraction of an economy in world history. It's precipitated a huge outmigration from Venezuela because the conditions have been so onerous. But the Venezuelans have stood strong on this. They would not have survived if it wasn't for the support of China, Russia, and Iran. And they came in at a very critical stage. The Chinese consider Venezuela a strategic partner. Exactly what that means is not completely clear, but it does suggest that the Chinese see it as part of their global strategic initiative to support Venezuela. The Russians have been very forthcoming in support of Venezuela, including on the military front, which is a third rail for the United States. Any military incursion other than itself is not accepted, or by its allies. I mean, it's very happy to have the British in the Malvinas and stuff like that, but it's not at all friendly to the idea of any of the global South to be involved. That is a very developing situation. This new realignment, and so much of the strategic initiative of the United States is to prevent Russia and particularly China into its incursion into this hemisphere. Right now, China is the second largest trading partner in the hemisphere after the United States. It is the largest trading partner for South America. And but what you're saying, and you alluded to the differences within the Trump administration about how best to impose U.S. imperialism. A lot of these actions by the United States may, in fact, force countries to be closer to China, particularly, rather than the opposite. And we'll see how that plays out. But that the drama is very high and it's playing out as we speak.
Thank you.
Okay, next is Norma, followed by Polina and Almaz. Go ahead, Norma.
Hey, everybody. I have a long list. I posted my email in the chat, so get in touch. The Apprentice, the new movie, was portrayed on an Amy Goodman Democracy Now! A few weeks ago. What was put on it was, Amy's a relative of one of the people that made The Wizard of Oz, and so she's big on this. Trump had a deep relationship with Roy Cohn when he was young and for years, and told him, don't ever give up. Never say that you're losing anything. Always tell that you are right about everything, and so on and so on. It was a huge section, and I can't find it right away, so I'm not going to look for it. I got a clip from someplace showing the rolling fields of lands occupied by Chinese who owned their home on that land, owned the garden adjacent, owned the field, the farming field adjacent, and right next to it, yes, in squares, one after another of occupied, those all lands all owned by the people who lived on them, the Chinese. This is, to me, very exciting because it's stopping.
2 minutes. 2 minutes.
Can I just take another couple minutes, 1 minute?
Okay, you can have one more minute. Please wrap up, Norma.
Yeah. The fields available for farming as opposed to the farming with machinery that is so comparatively unhealthy. Also saw a headline about prices dropping in China, about rent prices dropping in China. Also, you see all the liberation struggles going on throughout Africa and everywhere. And communism is happening. And I'd like to share those with you whenever you want.
Okay, thank you. Roger, did you have anything in response, or should we go on?
Go on, please.
Okay. Paulina, followed by Almaz.
Thanks. Thanks, Roger. I wanted to ask what you know about the extra U.S. presence, military presence in Puerto Rico. As you were mentioning, with the increased military presence along Venezuela's coast and throughout the Caribbean, apparently, besides that, the U.S. has also deployed 10 F-35 fighter jets to Puerto Rico, and the activists there, the anti-imperialist activists, are speaking up and perhaps, hopefully, even starting some kind of a campaign of a U.S. out of the Caribbean. If you could speak to that in relation to the possibility of U.S. military action against Venezuela, decapitation or whatever. Thank you.
Yeah, that's very important. I'm very glad that you raised the issue of Puerto Rico, because that hasn't gotten enough attention. The U.S., as you mentioned, has deployed these F-35 stealth fighters. And it's interesting to read, of course, I try to keep up with this, to read the military press. And the military press is all over this. They're saying it's like completely disproportionate. There's nothing that a F-35 can do against drugs. It is clearly, transparently another purpose. Very important also is the United States is now talking about reactivating a military base in occupied Puerto Rico. We should remember that Puerto Rico is a possession of the United States. It is not an independent territory. It is a nation, but is the nation that is occupied by the United States. It was the spoils of the 1898 U.S. The birth of U.S. imperialism, the Spanish American War. So yeah, the left in Puerto Rico is very concerned about the reactivation of this military base and making Puerto Rico once again a center of U.S. military activities for the Southern Command.
Thank you, Roger. Almaz, please go ahead.
Yes, good morning, and thank you very much for a wonderful presentation. I'd like to ask you about Essequibo, where this disputed region between Guyana and Venezuela. And as pretty much everybody knows, I suppose, that it's geostrategically a very important region, obviously, but also in the water, it has one of the richest oil reserve, and it's much better quality oil in Essequibo than in Venezuela itself. So do you think, so now, of course, the territory has been in dispute and is at the International Court of Justice for the longest time, but do you think it has ever, do you think that's one of the reasons also why the US is so interested in gaining a foot in Venezuela? But also, do you think it has any chance of ever being officially returned or given to Venezuela? Thank you.
Okay, so this is another international flashpoint. Essequibo is a territory that is contested. It's on the border of Venezuela and the present country of Guyana. But previously, that country was a British possession. And way back I believe it was in the 1800s, that the border was being adjudicated between the British and the Venezuelans. However, in this adjudication, the 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 Venezuelans were not directly represented. They were represented by the United States, who gave the shop away to Great Britain. And ever since then, it's been contested territory. I don't know if you could see this cup that I have right here. No, I guess this it probably can't see. It shows a map of Venezuela with the Essequibo region part of Venezuela. When I talked to Venezuelans, they said, we've always felt that the Essequibo was part of Venezuela. We've always seen that map. But the Guianans also feel it's part of their country. There's various international intrigues over who has jurisdiction, whether it's what international court has jurisdiction over it. But the important things right now, or the most salient things right now about the Essequibo dispute, is that it is Guyana is now very hostile to Venezuela. There is U.S. military incursion into Guyana to get at Venezuela. At the same time, for Guyana, it has now become one of the fastest growing economies in the entire world because U.S. multilateral corporations are going in there to exploit the oil, which the Venezuelans believe need to be adjudicated to see who owns them. So that is a real flashpoint. We could do a whole session on that, but it is another pressure on the Bolivarian revolution right now.
Thank you for bringing that up. Alan, go ahead.
Roger, thank you for your really informative presentation. Can you comment on the domestic response by the government and the masses of people and the political actors in Venezuela to this attack? In particular, I'm interested in the mobilization of the militias and how that is going and what it's really designed to do. A second question is if possible to comment on the response of the left in general, both in the U.S. and internationally. Seems like everybody has condemned the U.S. attack on Venezuela. Some on the left, though, are kind of stopping short of expressing support for the Venezuelan government in organizing the resistance. So, two questions there. Thanks.
Okay, yeah, those are all very critical issues. And I can give you my points of view. I'm not completely informed. There was a recent poll in Venezuela. There was a few recent polls in Venezuela that showed just overwhelming support of the government in resisting the U.S. incursion. There was just this tiny minority that supported the U.S. Regime change thing, contrary to Fox News, which said that the Venezuelans were euphoric about being attacked by the U.S. military. That was not collaborated by recent survey research data. We have to understand the situation and be realistic about the situation. I mean, these sanctions by the U.S. and its allies have had a tremendous toll on the Venezuelans. There's been a huge brain drain, because the most financially capable people are the people that, when conditions get bad, they have the ability to leave the country. So a lot of their professional staff, professional class, that the whole stratum has left. So the country is in a critical position, and there's a tremendous amount of fatigue. I mean, these sanctions that began in 2015 by Obama have continued, and they've continued and been ratcheted. The screws have been tightened on them. So there's this tremendous desire for getting back to what they would call, might call a normal situation. And so this latest thing with the military threat is just sort of made the pressure cooker more pressure on them. The response has been a mobilization of the population, not everybody, but it has served to strengthen the support of the people of their Bolivarian government, and it has served to isolate and expose the opposition that's aligned with the United States. And we'll see how much pressure they can stand, and hopefully they will remain strong. In terms of left response, it's been fairly universally opposed to U.S. imperialism. There was a small group of leftists, as you know, that are critical of the administration in Venezuela, accusing it of being authoritarian, pretty much taking their cues from really the State Department. They just make it sound anti-imperialist. They said we're against imperialism, but and we were in favor of socialism, but not actual socialism, only socialism in the ideal. But they are not a major force either internationally or in Venezuela. We can go on that, but I think maybe that's kind of the outline, and maybe go on to the next question if I might.
Yes, so we've contended with ultra-leftism for a very long time, and it's not going to go away. We might have a whole separate program about that sometime soon. I will call on Daniel as the final person on the stack. Go ahead, Daniel.
Yes. Can you hear me first?
Yes.
Oh, good. I have a question about Venezuela's next door neighbor, Colombia. Now, although this leftist president was elected by the people, the army, from what I understand, has a long-standing connection with the U.S. Now, does he hold his presidency only as long as the army will allow him? What's the potential of a coup d'etat? Thank you.
Okay, so I mean, of course, I don't have any special insights into what the potential of a coup d'etat is specifically, but I think your question is a good one because it raises a larger question of how much room do these leaders have to maneuver and to oppose U.S. imperialism. It's in their material interests for every one of them to oppose U.S. imperialism. But what they can do, what the parameters are very much limited by their domestic support, not just of the military, but in the case of Petro, in the legislature. He has a very broad coalition. It's not a unified coalition, and there's strong opposition within the legislature. So, to the extent that they can operate, is circumscribed. But what we're seeing is that right now in Colombia, is that Petro has done amazing stuff. I'm talking about this week. He's really give the finger to Donald Trump, and that's something that no other world leader has done. So we'll see what happens. We're just about out of time. So
yes.
Should I summarize up?
Yes, please. You get the last word, Roger.
Okay, well, I want to thank everybody for just incredibly insightful comments and some very, very good questions. Um, I wanted to end by where I began, is that Venezuela is hope. It's a hope for the global South. It's a hope for the anti-imperialist struggle. It is the hope that the imperialists recognize more than anybody else. And that goes back to Alan's Miller's last question, that sometimes there are elements in the left that don't recognize which side of the barricades they need to be on. And this is going to be very important. It's going to be important for us progressives, those of us who support the anti-imperialist initiative, to realize that there's going to be tough times ahead. We're seeing that right now with this huge U.S. military buildup in the Caribbean. The pressure will continue. And when these countries like Venezuela, Cuba, and Nicaragua are under pressure, they have to defend themselves. And we, as the left, need to recognize the importance of defending the revolution, that takes precedent, and that these countries will take authoritarian measures. There's no question about that, to defend themselves. And some of those measures will be overreactions. I mean, they don't know who's going to assassinate them. They don't know whether one person is an honest person and another person is in the pay of the imperialists. So it's very important for us to understand the international struggle and to realize that it's going to get more intense, and that the lines of engagement are going to become sharper and sharper. We're already seeing that on the issue of, we haven't discussed this, it's a separate issue, but on the issue of Ukraine, where some people are looking to destroy the Russia and dismember Russia, and and to carry that war, the endless war, to an end that destroys Russia. So there's big fault lines that are developing, and the really key issue is, from my point of view, the point of view that I've tried to argue, is that to understand that there is one dominant imperialist force, and that is the United States and its allies, that they are very powerful, that they will use their power because they feel threatened, and that we have to support those who are under attack, and most importantly, the Palestinians. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Roger. Before we end the recording, I just want to remind people that next week we're going to have Charlotte Cates speaking about the second anniversary of October 7th, and speaking about the genocide and the struggle of the Palestinians. So we hope that you can tune in then. And if you're not already a subscriber, please go to our website, icssmarks.org, and sign up to get our announcements every week. Also, we have a small budget, but we do have the need for some funds to keep our website going. And if you would like to donate, you can also do that from our website. Thank you. Can we end the recording now, please?
I'll do that now.
Thank you.